Hi everyone, my name's Laura and I'm the Specky Seamstress. Welcome back to my channel. I told you it wasn't going to be a year, so I just want to start this video by saying a massive thank you to everyone who has watched and commented on my video from last week, explaining where I've been for the last year. It was quite nerve-wracking filming again and talking about the past year, but I'm really pleased I did it, and I really do feel like I've been welcomed back with open arms onto YouTube. So I'm back properly and I'm going to talk to you about some sewing today, which is exciting. I mentioned in my last video that I was going to do a bit of a rundown of like my 10 top favourite patterns that I've made since I've been gone. But I started to go through the patterns that I wanted to talk about, and I realised that trying to do that in a compilation video was actually going to be quite tough, particularly for some of the patterns, because we all know that I like to ramble quite a lot and I generally have quite a lot to say, and some of these patterns I've made 6, 7, 8 versions of, and I felt like that was just going to be a little bit much. So I've decided to have separate videos about a few of the patterns, and then I'm going to run a bit of a compilation video at the end of this little kind of mini catch-up series, I suppose, to tell you about the rest of the patterns, predominantly ones that I've only made one of but have loved and would really like to make again. So today I'm going to talk about one of the patterns that I've made 8 versions of since I've been gone, which is the Xanthia tee, or the Xanthia top, by Liz Haywood. And this is a very basic, but also really not basic, top pattern that is zero waste, or at least very minimal waste. It's made just using a big square of fabric if you're making the short sleeve version, or you end up with a rectangle left over if you make the long version. Long sleeved version, I should say. So the pattern is designed to be made either with jersey or with woven fabrics, although with woven fabrics the suggestion is fairly flowy, lightweight fabrics. I've actually not really made a woven version, although hold that thought slightly. But I can see that it would be perfectly comfortable. It doesn't have any bust darts, so it probably wouldn't be my preference for a woven blouse, but it yeah, works really well as kind of a loose boxy tee and jumper pattern. I was really drawn by the fact that it had this big giant cross seam across the front of it, which I thought was quite an interesting design feature. And when I was reading about it being zero waste and low fabric usage, I kind of got more interested in it. It's also a pattern that comes up to a 70-inch bust, and I love that Liz actually uses models across the whole range of her size range in her photos and in her launch photos, which I love. I'm getting a little bit tired of people extending, or companies extending their pattern ranges, but not showing anyone even close to the top end of their size range, because you want to see how things fit on different bodies. So the whole kind of thing appealed to me, and I bought it as soon as it was released, and I read the instructions and was confused because it's not a sewing pattern, so to speak. It is instructions as to how you mark and make up the pattern for yourself for your own size. And this is very common in the zero waste sewing world. Rather than there being pattern pieces that you print, you measure different squares and rectangles and triangles and things. So when I say I was confused, honestly it didn't last long. It's a really, really simple pattern to make once you get your head around the construction, because the construction is a little unique. I really recommend you make up a little paper version, which then you can shape and contort and cut into and work out what you're doing. That's what I did, and is what's recommended in the pattern to give it a go. Now the measurements are given by size, and I looked at the finished garment measurements and decided to size down 2 sizes from what my body measurements were, based on the finished garment measurements and how I would like to have them fit. I didn't want anything really over boxy, but still kind of that boxy shape. So you've got a lot of options though, because you can just make it whatever size you want, basically. So I started off by making a long sleeve version. What I worked out is if I wanted to make the long sleeve version out of a normal width jersey fabric, so 145 or 150, I could actually make the long sleeve version out of 1 meter fabric, which is unheard of in my size, to make a long sleeve top out of 1 meter. So it's quite exciting, and I do think I will make a woven version at some point, because it will be fun to make something out of such little fabric. But I made this one, and I nested the pattern piece for the sleeves against the kind of edge of the fabric to minimise waste. And you do end up with so little waste if you do it from such a small piece of fabric. It's kind of cool. I bought this fabric, this bright blue fabric. I'm going to pop a picture. I've rolled up the sleeves into a cuff because it's long enough. And what I also did was sort of reduce the length a little bit. Because the pattern is basically made from a big square, the wider the square is, the longer the square is. So you don't make it out of a rectangle is the point, and you can't really lengthen and shorten the pattern in a normal traditional way. And I really wanted it to be quite cropped for going over dresses. So I ended up putting a mock band at the bottom, which is where you fold up and under the hem and kind of effectively make an overlocked band around the middle. So rather than adding an extra piece of fabric at the bottom or hemming it traditionally, I've done this mock band, and I'll try and link a tutorial to that because there's loads out there. It's a really simple way to add a band if you don't have any matching fabric or you've got a little bit of extra length. That's super quick and easy. This bright blue version that I've made is probably my most worn garment in the year that I've been gone. I say probably, it is. It's 100% the most worn pattern, most worn garment I've worn. My words are not coming to me quite so easily today as they did the other day. And I just wear it all the time. It's amazing. I picked up this fabric. I love bright blue. I love bright teal. It's a really beautiful colour. From Satisfaction quite a long time ago now, and I only had a metre, and I can't remember whether it was a remnant or whether I only bought a metre for some reason, but my plan had been to colour block a jumper out of it for some time, and every time I pulled it out, every time I wanted to make a jumper, I didn't have anything that went with it. So it had just been in my stash for such a long time. But when the Xanthia pattern came along, it was perfect for it. And I made this up. Honestly, this pattern is super quick. It's something like 4 seams to sew. You assemble effectively a tube or a bag, and then you cut armholes and neck holes out of it and the hem. So I then bought a couple of plain jerseys because what was really lacking in my wardrobe was plain t-shirts, predominantly to go under stuff, but also to go with fun patterned skirts and trousers. So I bought a couple of plain cotton jerseys, single cotton jerseys, so no elastane, just a little bit of mechanical stretch. I bought them from Fabworks Mill. Fabworks Mill does amazing jersey deals, basically. They were really cheap. I think they were like £6 a metre. And I made up a royal blue version and also a pale yellow version. Now, the short sleeve one came with a different requirement for shortening things, because the sleeves in the short sleeve version are quite long, and I kind of didn't want them to be as long as they were. They sort of came down to like elbow length, and where it was already quite a boxy tee, I didn't want it to also be boxy kind of all the way down to my elbows. So I ended up doing quite a large roll up cuff on my sleeves on these 2 versions, and I really like them. I'm really happy with them. But what I also did was reach out to Liz and ask her, would there be a way of shortening these sleeves? Like, is there a way of doing that would be easier? And actually, it is just geometry. It is maths for those of you that are not so keen on that, but it was quite simple to do. And if you reached out to Liz, if you were interested in having slightly shorter sleeves, you can actually do that within reason. You still need enough width to do so. Now, I mentioned before the big cross front seam on the Zanthia top, which is what drew me to it. What I haven't mentioned is the seams on the shoulder and on the sleeve. So the sleeve pieces are made up from two kind of rectangles that you cut diagonally, and you end up with a really interesting seam detail. And in the pattern, it recommends that you put that seam detail on the underarm. Particularly for the long sleeve, you end up with this kind of triangle insert, almost like a gusset, to increase the width at the top of the pattern. But I actually put mine at the top. I really love it. I think it goes with the whole cross front geometric vibe. And in the short sleeve version, you end up with some kind of interesting seams around the sleeve as well. It's quite a fun pattern, and actually for those of you that don't know, I'm an engineer in my day job, and the engineers at work love this top because they know I make clothes, and they were like, what's all of these seams? And it's been quite fun saying how it's all made from squares and rectangles and triangles. So you could obviously put the underarm gusset on the underarm rather than at the top, and also you could move that cross front seam over to the back should you want to hide it for some reason. And the reason I mention that is because I probably should have done that in my next jumper version of the pattern. So I had this idea that I could use a heat vinyl transfer to put the logo Power on a jumper. I'd seen a similar version from a fast fashion site, and I thought it would be really cool to do. And Joy, who used to run the business Pink Coat Club, but is now joy.margot on Instagram, kindly offered to print using her Cricut machine the Power logo for me. I do actually own a Cricut now. My husband bought me one for Christmas, and I haven't got it out of the box yet. So I would love to hear your favourite projects and just like words of encouragement and confidence, because I'm a little bit nervous about it. But I really would like to get that out soon, and maybe I'll do a little bit of a like beginners probably failings at using the Cricut machine over the coming weeks. So I made this up, and I made the jumper up really quickly in a really nice dark grey sweatshirting, but I put this across the cross front, and although the heat vinyl did work across the seam and it wasn't a problem, it was a little bit tricky to apply, and actually it does kind of break up the logo a little bit because you can still see the seams underneath. So I think if I were to do that again, particularly on a t-shirt, which I might do in the coming months, I'd probably put the cross front on the back. And that's really easy to do because, as I said, you make effectively kind of a bag and cut out the holes that you need. And so you could just flip that over and cut the neck hole the other way round, basically, because the front and back are identical. After that version, I also made a plain cream version, which is actually in a double folded, like a double layer silk jersey, also from Fabworks Mill, which was an unusual fabric, but it's kind of cool, and it feels beautiful to wear. And I also made a plain black version from the cotton interlock jersey from Fabworks Mill as well. I haven't even photographed those, but they actually get quite a lot of wear. A plain white top and a plain black top underneath dungarees or strappy dresses and stuff has been really, really useful to have. I wanted to talk about the 8th version I made, which I don't have a picture for because I made it for my husband and he does not do pictures. So in fact, the condition of me making it for him was that he did not have to have any pictures done in it. And I say that as if I thrust this makeup on him, but he had been asking me for a new hoodie for a really long time. He did been asking me for a zip up hoodie or jacket. He wears them every day, and a few of his were getting a bit old, and it was really time that I actually made him a garment. And I made this, it was a little bit of an experiment. I bought some maroon sweatshirting, it was actually more like French terry, from the Maker's Merchant before they closed down. And I thought, I know, I'll just be able to cut straight up the middle once I've made the jumper and add a zip in. And that did kind of work, to be honest. He likes the cross seams at the front. I did ask him if he'd prefer it in the front or the back, but he quite likes them in the front. That did make the zip a little bit bulky around that middle centre bit where you'd cut across those crossing seams. But it worked out okay. Now for Nick, I made the size according to his chest measurement, and I also had to make it a little bit longer. So where for mine, I cropped it and made it shorter with the mock waistband. For him, I added a new band on the bottom. So obviously that means I used a little bit more fabric than I would have done otherwise. And it was a really, really simple make. Would definitely make them again. I'm making sure that I'm filming this video when Nick isn't here, because I don't want him to hear that I'm going to say that I'm making him more. But I can definitely see me making him a few more, maybe in the run up to birthdays and Christmases. So that's the Xanthia tee, Xanthia top by Liz Haywood. I've just remembered the version I didn't tell you about. It's the one I told you was sort of woven. And it's probably the most exciting one. So let me tell you about that. I decided for some reason that I would make a quilted version. And I could have just made this with the backing as if it was one layer of fabric. But I decided I'd try and make it reversible. It hasn't quite worked, if I'm honest, but it was quite fun, a fun experiment, and I think I'd do it slightly differently next time. I haven't actually worn this as much as I absolutely 100% should have done. It's such a cool pattern for quilting opportunity and scrap busting because of the cross seam in the middle. You get this fun like meeting of all the different quilt blocks. And what I ended up doing actually was adding a border down two sides of my fabric piece, which meant I ended up with sort of like a border around the whole cross, which was kind of cool. And I would like to make another version of this in kind of a scrappy make. I've had a bit of a play around with what it would look like if you colour blocked the square that you start with, particularly for a short sleeve make. And you could make it so that you get kind of a half and half. So you get the 2/4 of it in one colour and the 2/4 of it in another colour. And you can also get it so that you end up with half and half vertically rather than diagonally or horizontally, depending on which way you cut the fabric, which I think would be quite cool. But I haven't had any pieces of fabric that just kind of work for that at the minute. But I actually think that that's probably something I'll do pretty soon. When I originally fell in love with this pattern, I had pulled out all of my 1 metre pieces of jersey, but I'm not convinced I'm going to use this pattern for patterned fabrics, printed fabrics, because you get that cross in the middle. I think it has to be the right print. So I had this idea that I would make a polka dot version, which I think would be really cute, but I'm not sure about the like clashing of the polka dots in the middle. So I think if I were to do that, I might add a plain stripe down the outside in a similar version to the quilted one that I made. But I haven't quite decided yet. She also includes instructions in the pattern to make the pattern like truly zero waste, because the only waste from the pattern, for the short sleeve version anyway, is the neck hole that you cut out. And she uses the neck hole in her zero waste version as a little pocket, a little zip pocket that you put on the in the seam at the bottom. I haven't done that because I don't see that I would use it particularly, but I am interested in potentially using zips in the seams for access for pumping in my near future. So this time for real, that is the Zanthia tee pattern by Liz Haywood Studios. It's a really, really cool pattern. I would definitely recommend picking it up. I would love to know if you've made it or if you're planning on making it, because yeah, I really love it. I want to make so many more. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!